Welcome to At Home Radio, a podcast about feeling at ease where we are. When we're comfortable or at home with ourselves, we're more likely to be open to others' point of view. I'm Kate Thomas. Today's conversation is with Capri S. Cafaro, former minority leader of the Ohio Senate and the author of the recently published cookbook, United We Eat. Thank you so much for being here, Capri.
Thanks so much for having me. Always happy to be with a fellow Buckeye.
Oh, absolutely. Go Bucks. In all ways, not just the football team. Anyway, you have a memorable motto, pie fixes everything. Would you give an example of how that worked during your years as an Ohio State Senator?
Sure, absolutely. I've always loved to bake and cook, something that I grew up doing with my grandmother, as many of us do. That's how we often pass along our cultural traditions anyway. So, I love to bake, and particularly I like to bake pies. And during my time in the Ohio Senate, I would work a lot with members across the aisle on pretty substantive, legislative endeavors. And so when we would work together and we would hit these specific legislative milestones, like voting a bill out of committee or going from one chamber to the other, from the Senate to the House, and obviously, passing a bill into law, if that were the case, as it often was, I would make a pie and I would bring it in. And it would be an opportunity for two offices, Democrats and Republicans and their staffs, to get together, build some fellowship in a pretty, casual way. I found that that food was a tool to bring people together, a common denominator at a time where we are so incredibly divided. And really that was, the spark ultimately that led to the cookbook, United We Eat.
I think that's terrific. United We Eat is your debut cookbook. It came out this past summer, fittingly, on July 4th. So it's fitting because this 128-page book has recipes representing all 50 states. And I really like that you have submissions pretty equally divided by political leaders from both sides of the aisle. So tell us a little bit more about the cookbook.
Thank you. I've always wanted to do something like this. Again, I've always loved to cook. I actually love opening up my home and, having that warmth. Very appropriate for the conversation that we're having on a show like this, with the theme of being at ease, right? Being at ease, feeling at home, having that hospitable warmth. And so, cooking has been a way to do that. This cookbook is a way to do that as well. Something I've always wanted to do, but now it's actually has given me an opportunity to bring together two passions of, I guess, politics and pies, politics and cooking. So, there are 50 recipes for all 50 states, plus one more for the District of Columbia. Of those, total of 51, recipes, even though it does say 50 on the cover, I get that. About half of them were submitted by current and former political leaders, Democrat and Republican. So that group of 24 recipes, pretty evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. The remaining 26, I actually worked on, adapted, and developed myself. And really worked hard to do a lot of research on the individual states, their culinary profiles, their agricultural output, their cultural dynamics, and really tried to find and put together, a well-researched recipe that was reflective of, the literal flavors, but also the cultural flavors, and tell that story of that individual state, and ultimately tell the story of our nation. It was important for me to also get real political voices involved in this, because, it is reflective of, whether or not it is Donna Brazile and her, former chair of the Democratic National Committee and her, mother's gumbo, or the current Republican governor of Alabama, Kay Ivey, in her recipe, for example, that is her mother's recipe for gooey cake. These are heirloom recipes. They're passed down, and it's something that people can relate to. So, everybody loves to eat, everybody needs to eat, and most people can relate to a story about passing down a recipe. And, so it humanizes these individual political figures, again, at a time where we are in this very us versus them mentality. But we also have a lot of examples of these political leaders talking about how they in their own political lives have used food to bring people together, which I thought was also a very important part of, what United We Eat is all about.
Yes. For example, Senator D'Amato, a Republican from New York, and Senator Moynihan, he was a fellow New Yorker, but a Democrat, dreaded Democrat. And breaking bread, they became friends and they understood each other. Why is this important?
Well, it's interesting. Senator D'Amato's recipe is also one of his mother's. It was a lasagna recipe, and he does represent the Empire State, New York. I think, again, food, from so many of the anecdotes that are in the book, as well as, my own personal lived experience, it is a way to help people, let people's guard down. So even if you are, in a formal dining room, you're still out of the boardroom. You're still, shifting the mood from, a tense negotiation or an us versus them, and you have something else to focus on. Again, it's a humanizing social practice that helps, I think, warm people's, hearts in some ways, and provides an opportunity and an environment to get to know people in a little bit more of a personal vein as well. So even if you're maybe not trying to negotiate a bill over dinner, for example, when you try to build those relationships, particularly with people that differ in their own, from your own political views, if you do that in a setting that is more casual and is more personal, you get to know them as a human being and not just as a name on a sign or a person that you see on TV, or, for example, your neighbor or, somebody that, this is an election year. Your neighbor may have a totally different yard sign next door than you do. Or maybe you don't have a sign, but you don't support the guy's sign next door. But if you know that person and you have a relationship with them and you had a block party or you've gotten to know them, through a barbecue or kids coming together and baking cookies over the holidays or whatever, you're less likely to drive by their house and be like, that guy, I don't like him because, I don't support the sign that's in his yard, because you know them as a person. And that's what I think food helps people do.
I think that's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful to have that. So you have people even in office right now. And Amy Klobuchar is, she's represented. And what did she contribute?
Amy Klobuchar, so she's a U.S. Senator from Minnesota, and obviously she is also a former presidential candidate in the 2020 election cycle, and she submitted her award-winning tater tot hot dish. And some folks may know this, but, we call them casseroles, but, in Minnesota, and particularly in the upper Midwest, they usually call casseroles hot dishes. And it's the same kind of thing, but like a hot dish is not necessarily just, something you bring to a potluck. It's almost like a state of mind. Again, it's this idea of warmth. And, the fact that Amy Klobuchar submitted a hot dish, I think shows, the pride that she has in her state, understanding the culture of her state, the relevance of a hot dish to, sort of the culinary landscape of Minnesota. But I have to tell you, I was totally floored. I don't know Amy Klobuchar. I've never met Amy Klobuchar. And so, part of this process, and we can talk about that a little bit too, is, cold calling or cold emailing a lot of people to see who would actually want to get involved. Some people totally turned me down. Some people said, yeah, we want to do it, and they never submitted. It took a lot of work just to get those 24 to come together. But the day before the book was released, Amy Klobuchar tweeted out an article actually from my local newspaper, the Warren Tribune Chronicle, here in Ohio, and said, check out, my award-winning hot dish that's going to be in this cookbook that comes out tomorrow. I was flabbergasted. I'm like, I cannot believe this. Amy Klobuchar just tweeted me out. She tweeted about the book. She shared this article. Like, wow. So that was pretty cool.
That's very cool. That's a great reception. Did anybody else give you that kind of warm reception?
Well, not quite like that. I mean, certainly not people that I didn't know at all. Here's somebody that I've never met, but I did do a couple cooking segments throughout this process, actually leading up to the publishing of the book, not beforehand, not after, with two individuals, both Republicans. We try to do the segments balanced. I am a Democrat, and we would usually have a Republican with me. And I did one with the former chair of the Republican National Committee, who's now on MSNBC, Michael Steele. And we did a television segment together for the Smith Island 10-layer cake. He represented Maryland. And then I also did one with a woman named Anita McBride, who is actually a colleague of mine at American University, as well as on the board of the National Italian American Foundation. She represented Connecticut and did a family recipe called pizza rustica, which is really more like a pot pie than a pizza. But I know them both from other work, so they were cool enough to go on TV with me, but it's because I actually know them.
Okay, that's great. So where were these on TV?
They were both in Washington, in Washington, D.C. So one was on the CBS affiliate there, and one was on the ABC affiliate there.
I see.
I've done a number of cooking segments on television now all across the country, thanks to United We Eat. So it's been really, that's been a whole interesting process too, doing cooking segments from my kitchen in Ohio to every place from Portland, Oregon to New Orleans, Louisiana, and not having to leave my house. So that's been really interesting. And because of the way that the pandemic is, there's no book tour, there's, everything is virtual. Mm-hmm. And so
right.
it's here you are doing all this stuff, and with the thanks to the technology.
Yes. Well, that's really quite a process that you went through, and you did a lot of research into all the states and their culinary traditions.
Very much so. And I learned so much. So, for example, I'll give you an interesting example on this. Each state had some of their own sort of obvious dishes and challenges as well. So, I didn't want to do, Chicago deep dish pizza for Illinois. And so I did some research, found something called a horseshoe sandwich, which is an open face sandwich. It's called horseshoe because of the shape. It's a ham steak, and it's open face, and it's covered in my version. We cover it with sweet potato fries and a Swiss cheese sauce, which is a slight modification of kind of the traditional version. But it was invented, I guess, as legend has it, by a chef at a restaurant in Abraham Lincoln's hometown. And so it's kind of interesting to bring those things together. I did a Pepsi salad, which is a Jell-O mold salad for North Carolina. And that's because it was a cherry Jell-O with Pepsi and black walnuts, because black walnuts are a large producer, or North Carolina is a large walnut producing state. And it's the place where Pepsi Cola was actually founded in the late 19th century. Another really interesting one, and I could go on forever, but Nevada was interesting because, looking up Nevada food, it's buffet, shrimp cocktail. And I'm like, this is not, I know we can find something better than whatever, is coming back from Nevada, which is basically a parade of things you would associate with Las Vegas. So in my research, I discovered that because of the silver mines in Nevada, there was a large Basque immigrant population. And they brought their own culinary traditions with them. There is a Basque food festival that I guess still happens, and they prepare their meat in a special way. Nevada is also a big onion producing state. So I had a Basque filet with caramelized onions for Nevada.
That's terrific. Very, very good. Well, did you make all these dishes multiple times to really get them correct?
Some of them. Thankfully, the publisher that I work with focuses pretty exclusively on cookbooks. So I actually had a good team of recipe testers that were able to help me through that process as a first time person, to make sure that, because it's one thing to know that it works. It's another thing to know that it can be replicated time and time again. So you do the research and, you figure it's going to work, you play with it, and then you got to make sure that you try it and retry it to ensure that no matter who's trying to make it, basically it's going to be consistent. And so I'm lucky, having never done something like this before, that working with a cookbook explicit publisher who's done, for example, a lot of the books related to Disney, and some of the work that they do. I'm a huge Disney fan, so I was all excited to find out that they've done a lot of the Disney related cookbooks and Disney books. But they're pretty exclusively all culinary stuff. So that was very, very helpful. So, because for example, I don't have a smoker. Okay. I don't smoke meat. I don't have a smoker. And so, we have, for example, former Governor Mike Huckabee had some smoked, I think, pork butt. I'm not going to go out and buy a smoker just to figure out his recipe. Right. And so, it's one thing to dealing with the ones that I did myself, but it's a whole other thing when you're, getting recipes that other people have submitted and they've kind of been sort of passed through the ages, and you got to make sure that, they stand up to being put in a cookbook. So that was definitely a process, and one that I'm thankful I had some help for.
That's great. Who is the publisher?
They're called Story Farm Publishing. And they're based in Florida.
Yes, they're storied. They have a lot of, I've heard of them over the years. So after term limits brought your time in the Ohio Senate to a close, you began teaching public policy at the university level. So you're at American University in Washington, right. D.C. So this is off the topic of cookbooks, but I would like to know from your perspective if you think that young people will help us heal the political divide.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for that. It's hard to say, fully. I think that every generation you have this hope that, the next generation coming up is able to harness their idealism and apply it in a way that, can help, better our nation and move us forward. And I would say my experience with students, particularly at American University and just in the content that I teach. I've also taught, when I was actually in the state Senate, I taught for 2 years at Youngstown State University, teaching social welfare policy and their social work program. I'm also a licensed social worker. But so, when you're dealing with these policy classes, oftentimes you are coming into contact with people that are more interested in public policy, public service, politics, campaigning. And when you choose to go to school in Washington, D.C., I think that even levels that one more up. So it certainly is my hope. I have had an opportunity to interface with a lot of students that are incredibly energetic and bright and knowledgeable. And, more importantly, I think community and civic minded. And those are the basis, I think, of trying to, start to heal our nation and move things forward, because, we ultimately have to remember that we are, one nation, that we are all, sharing not only the same country, but the same planet. And while we may not agree on everything, that, we need to come back to common decency. And, we've always seen over the years, Democrats and Republicans, people would say, well, they have the same goals. They just have different ways to get there. Mm-hmm. I think in recent years, over the last 5 years or so, I think that there's been a realignment in the parties, and I think that there's a lot of concern that maybe each party does not have the same objectives in mind. So it used to just be the method was different, but the objective was the same. And I think that the younger generation, I'm noticing, is kind of coming back to that, focused on what's the greater good, what is the common good, and how can we find ways to work together to move forward. So cautiously optimistic, at least in my experience with my students.
Well, that's good to know. And, we're all, as you were saying back, when we break bread together and we really share our humanity with each other. And that's what we have. We have all this stuff in common. And it's a tiny, tiny difference, really, that we really differ on. Everything else, we're really pretty alike. And you brought a lot of that with your home-baked pies back in the State House. So that's wonderful. Was there a favorite one?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I am not a big baker of fruit pies. Mm-hmm. I love experimenting with cream pies and cookie crust because I find that, that combination is really not only an interesting kind of mouthfeel and texture, but it gives you many more combinations to work with from a flavor standpoint. So, I did one that was like grasshopper, which is kind of like a mint, like a mint chocolate chip type of flavor with like an Oreo crust and some chocolate shavings. I've done Mexican chocolate cream pie with, I think, what did I use for that one? Ginger snap crust, I believe, because it's cayenne pepper that I put in the chocolate cream. So I always try to play around with the flavors, but my personal favorite is butterscotch.
Oh,
old fashioned, like my papa.
Very good. Sounds wonderful. So, okay. Well, Capri, thank you for being with us today and for creating this cookbook, which has a really needed message. So thanks so much. I hope it's doing fabulously. We can get it wherever books are sold, right?
Right now, it's predominantly on Amazon, okay. But we are working with everything has just been slowed down from the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So you should be able to get it at like independent retailers as well as a number of chain bookstores like Books A Million and shortly Barnes & Noble. So hopefully by the holiday season, all of that will be finally all sorted out. But like everything has happened in 2020. A lot of unintended consequences because of the pandemic. So right now, Amazon.com, it's insane.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you again. This has been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
This is Kate Thomas with At Home Radio. Until next time, let's get together and have some pie.
At Home Radio. Presenter and creator, Kate Thomas. Recorded at Command Center Studio. Music and video produced by Jonathan, the producer.